Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our webinar on budgeting for federal grants in the SF424A. My name is Eddie Gonzalez. I'm the Director of Partnerships and Grants for the NPS Chesapeake Gateways office. This is kind of a module within our current application period. We do have a grant that we'll show some specifics of that closes on November 3rd, and we want to make sure to give everybody as good a chance to compete for those dollars as possible. We came up with this workshop or this webinar based on some of the things that we were seeing in last year's application process, and some of the things that we noted were in people's budgets that we wanted to highlight. So we worked with a partner to develop today's program. Next slide, please. I did want to start by, providing some context that as an office, our office is 25 years old. We were started by an act of Congress, the Chesapeake Bay Initiative Act of 1988. And I wanted to highlight this piece in yellow. You can read the full act, but it really challenges our office to provide technical and financial assistance in cooperation with other federal agencies, state and local governments, nonprofit organizations, and the private sector. So, our grant program was meant to be a resource in providing the type of financial assistance that's asked for in this legislation. But that means that there's some skills on your end in being competitive in applying for these grants that we want to make sure everybody has an equal chance of competing for these dollars. Next slide. So I was very fortunate to attend a workshop that was part of an EPA program called Recreation Economies for Rural Communities. This is a program looking to support rural economies and how they're re-strategizing their economic development. And I met Carrie Staton at one of those webinars. Carrie is the director of Northern West Virginia Brownfields Assistance Center at West Virginia University, where she provides strategic direction and oversight for the center and its programs. A lot of what the center does is assist communities in pursuing and successfully acquiring support for some of their brownfields efforts that they're trying to address. So, Carrie is very skilled in helping communities be competitive. So we asked her to come today to share what she knows about the budgeting process and, specifically what it takes to, on the budgeting side, to apply for federal grants. As she's presenting, I'm going to pop in with some examples of things that we noticed this last round of grants, just to give you a heads up on things to be mindful of. But otherwise, Carrie's got a great presentation that's going to walk us through all the fundamentals of a budget and the federal forms. So I will turn it over to Carrie to get us started. Thank you, Carrie, for joining us.
Thanks, Eddie. So I'm excited to be with you today. Just before we get started, a little bit more about my program. Although we are located at West Virginia University, we do have funding from the US EPA Brownfields program to provide technical assistance on brownfield redevelopment across the Mid-Atlantic. So all states that are in EPA Region 3, many of whom have Chesapeake Bay areas, we are able to help. So if you're working on a project that is brownfield related or thinking about the brownfields in your community, we have a suite of services that we can provide, including education, which is kind of how I got here today. As Eddie said, grant writing assistance, looking at brownfields, and then also some design support. And all of our services are free. All you have to do is ask, and my contact information is on these slides, and I believe you'll be getting these after this. So why project budgets? Mostly because people tell you have to do one, right? But project budgets are important because they can help you clarify your plans and in fact can help to tell your story as part of your grant proposal. They give your reviewer more detail on how you plan to accomplish your goals. Many times I've read a grant and wondered how exactly somebody was going to do that. And then by looking at the budget and seeing where their money was going, was able to get a little bit of clarity. So it can be useful to that in that way, both for the reviewer in trying to find your story and for you in trying to convey that story. And with all of that, it can be intimidating, but it doesn't have to be. Some budgets look very scary, and a lot of grants, it can be overwhelming and make you anxious to be worried about what you might get wrong, but it doesn't have to be. And so we're going to talk today a little bit about hopefully tools and strategies that make it a little less scary. So budget formats can range from very detailed. Some agencies want incredibly detailed budgets. Some folks just want a more general budget. If your funder has given you a suggested format for anything, but certainly for budgets, my number one recommendation is to use their budget. The reason I suggest that is that the reviewers are going to be used to looking at the same thing. And if it's easier for them to find the information they're looking for because they know where to look for it, it's going to make it a lot easier on them. And you definitely want to make their lives easier as they're reviewing your grant among many, many others. That doesn't mean you can't use your own format to create it. I tend to use my own format and then put it in whatever version the agency wants it in, but you definitely want to make it easier on your reviewer to find your information. If they don't give you one, then you just want to find something that makes you comfortable, that makes your job easier, and most importantly, makes Excel or whatever program like Excel you're using do as much of the work and the math for you as possible to help minimize the calculation errors that you might have. So on top of your budget in your format through an Excel document or a spreadsheet, you also need a budget narrative. This is where you're going to give more information about your budgeted item, more than just the numbers. Talk about how you got your math, how you got that number, show your work, and why that part of the budget is important to the implementation of your process or your program. It explains how your funds will be used. And again, it helps to tell that story of your project as your reviewer is going through the proposal package. Some standard budget categories, and these are the categories that you're likely to find on a federal form like the SF424A, which we will also talk about today. Personnel, of course, the folks who are doing the work that you're paying. Fringe, or their benefits that come along with that. Travel, supplies, and equipment. So the difference typically between the supplies and equipment, and we'll talk about all of these in more detail as we go, is that equipment tends to be much larger, over $5,000, and to have to last longer. Supplies tend to be considered things that are sort of one use and then you're done. Things like office supplies, event supplies, things like that. Contractual, for folks who are doing the work and being paid by you but are not employed by your organization. Construction, for anything where you're building or deconstructing things in my world. Other, which is just the catch-all for things that maybe don't fit nicely into these other categories, and your indirect or overhead costs. All right. So personnel and fringe. This is your personnel, is your cost for salaries or your wages. Sometimes you might express this as an hourly rate, so how much people make per hour and how many hours they're going to be working on the project. You might express it as a percentage of full FTE or full-time equivalent. So this is what they make in a given year, and they're going to do about 20% of their time on this project, and that's what we're charging. For all grants, you should only charge what is a reasonable amount of effort for that program. So you want to charge what you're really truly expecting that employee to be working on, how much time they're really going to give to the grant, to make sure that you're within procurement regulations, and only include the folks that are actually working on the program or the project. So you may have somebody like an office assistant or an administrative assistant who generally supports your whole team and all that they do, but they really don't have a direct work on that project. It would not be appropriate in that case to include them on your budget. Fringe is tied very closely to your personnel. This is the cost of your standard benefits for personnel, things like health insurance, dental, time off plans, your retirement. Most places calculate this as a percentage of the salary or wages. You probably already have this because it's going to be the same rate across all proposals. It may differ between your full-time and part-time employees, because full-time employees may likely get different benefits than your part-time employees. And just a typical rate, what I usually see is around 30%, give or take. So what we're going to do throughout this is we're going to talk about each category, and then I have some examples of what that might look like in a budget and in a budget narrative. So up first is personnel, and I've given you two examples. As I said before, sometimes you might budget your personnel as a percentage of full-time effort, as you see at the top. So we have annual salary rates for our director and our volunteer coordinator. We've estimated how much percentage of their time they'll spend on this grant. And then the Excel document that I pulled this from has done the math for me and figured out that 20% of 75,000 is 15,000. The alternative to that would be to do an hourly rate. You again put in how many what your hourly rate is for your director and your volunteer coordinator, how many hours you think they'll work over the life of the project on this project, and Excel does the math. And then once that personnel is calculated and totaled under that line, the fringe line would be here. I've set the fringe rate at 27%. That would calculate against your personnel time to give you your fringe rate. And that is against your total personnel. A budget narrative for, yes, go ahead.
Carrie, sorry, can you go back for a second?
Sure.
I apologize. Yeah, I'll probably be jumping in here
Do
a few times. A couple of things to highlight here on the personnel based on the last grant cycle we just went through. There is a distinction between personnel and then your contractors. Some folks were putting the money they were going to be paying a person contracting versus service in the personnel line item, and we were having to move that into the contractor line item. So this is personnel. These are people on your staff that you are making some arrangement with to have them do work for this project through the organization versus a contract. That's one thing to note. The other thing is that the level of detail she's showing here, where it's either percentage or hourly rate times how many hours, that's really the level of detail that allows a reviewer to understand whether the staff time you're including in your budget is adequate for the role that you would be listing in the project itself. We did have some examples where somebody would get listed in the proposal and they weren't reflected in the budget, or the reverse. They were reflected in the budget, but they were not referenced in the project. So the reviewers had question as to who is this person? Why are they in one and not the other? So make sure that you're being mindful of who's doing the work, what would it take for them to do the work, and that's what you're capturing. Don't just put in a 20,000 line item without some calculation as to how you came up with that 20,000, because that's something the reviewers are going to ask. Sorry, go ahead.
Fine, I think those are great notes. And there was a question I saw in the chat as you're talking, and I answered. I'll say that the Excel document that I screenshotted here was just a sample budget that I had from a class I taught, and I'd be happy to share that. I'll give that to Eddie, and he can pass it along with the slides. All right.
Thanks, Karen.
So budget narrative that goes along with those calculations. In your personnel line, you want to say what it is that those people are going to be doing. I think this hits some of Eddie's point of where it really directly ties that line. So you probably have talked about this in the narrative about the work that's going to happen. And here you're talking about specifically the humans who are going to do that work, right? Not just that your team is going to do it, but the director is going to lead the implementation of the program, including rollout, be in charge of financial aspects and those sort of things. And that is calculated at 20% of FTE. That's typically how I write my budgets. And so that's how I've written these narratives. And that and then as compared to that, the volunteer coordinator is going to manage the community volunteers throughout the program and integrate the program with any other activities you have going on, and that is 35% of that person's FTE. And then in fringe benefits, I would suggest if you're writing grants a lot to just have a standard fringe benefit description, because it shouldn't be changing. It's just, this is what our fringe benefits are. We have calculated that comes to roughly on average 27% of salary expenses, and we check that regularly, right? You didn't figure out what the percentage was 10 years ago and just roll with it. You update that every time you update your benefits or something like that. So that is personnel and fringe. Travel may not always be necessary for all types of programming. And I think I meant to say at the beginning that I'm here to tell you about budgets, and Eddie's here to answer your questions about and give you some nuance about this specific grant opportunity. So I don't know if you guys are traveling on these budgets, but I assume that you were, so that we could use everything as an example. Typically travel might include the lodging if you have to stay overnight somewhere, the mileage, or the cost of a rental if your organization rents versus asking people to take personal vehicles, if you have to fly somewhere, going to conferences and registrations, the per diem you pay when folks travel overnight. When I'm budgeting, I always use standard rates that are provided by the GSA and updated every year. So this is where they tell you what the sort of acceptable mileage rate is, what is the standard cost for hotels. I will say that the GSA rates for hotels are based on what rates hotels give to federal employees. It does not always mean that that's the market where you're going. So it's a good sort of estimator tool, but it may, in reality, you may end up paying a little bit more than that for hotels. Anything you would add here, Eddie, before we get to the math?
Yes, thank you. For travel on our end from Park Service, we see this as personnel travel. So this is travel by your organization staff related to the project versus if you're going to have a program where you're bringing participants from one location to another or taking them out into a field location to do a hike or a research project, that would fall under the contract line if you're renting a bus. Even though the contract is for travel, it's not travel in this category. Travel in this category is reimbursements to staff members related to the program that would get reimbursed through this versus any travel arrangements you're making through a third-party contractor, a rental car, or a contracted bus service. Those would fall under the contract line item. I will also say that if you put these in the wrong category, none of this will kick you out. It's more important that you give the best guess of what the amount is. But if you end up coding it to the wrong category, we would fix that in the budget negotiation. So don't worry too much about putting it in the wrong section, but I did want to highlight that difference.
That's great. Looks like there's a couple questions that are for you that you may want to. I don't know if you want to do those now, Eddie, or if you want me to keep going first. They are travel related. Oh, there was a fringe. Is there a specific percentage for fringe that they should use for the Gateways grant in particular?
We do not have a specific percentage for fringe. We do for indirect that I'll mention when we get to that part, but I don't believe that there's a formula for this on our end. I think it's just how your organization calculates fringe, within your administrative costs. You would already be providing fringe benefits to your employees, so that is already based on a certain ratio that your organization is already paying for the paid staff. Does mileage need to be supported by odometer? No, you won't be. There is a financial report that everybody will supply, but you don't provide receipts at that level. I think it's just an accountability that you're going to be signing. Somebody in your organization is going to be signing their name to these financial reports, and they would be liable if there was any sort of malfeasance that would come out. But it isn't at that level.
Great. So, a lot of the things that we do in my work is site visits. And so the current GSA mileage rate is 65.5 cents per mile. And for this, I estimated that the sites were close by, that they're about 25 miles away or 50 miles round trip, and that we would make 10 trips to them and just have Excel doing that math for me again. I like for Excel to do my math. And then you just talk about why are you traveling is important, not just where you're going, but why is it important? So you are here, I'm saying we're visiting our priority sites and how far they are, that we think will make 10 trips to each of those 5 sites over the project period, and that I've used the current mileage rate there. You might have different kinds of travel. A lot of times, if you do have different kinds of travel, you would want to put the different types, right? So we have these site visits. This is for this purpose. We might have going to conferences to present on our work. That's this travel, and just clarifying the different purposes for that.
Yeah, and from our point, we would need the breakdown of all the components of the travel. So airfare, hotel, mileage would all be broken out as sublines within that travel line that you're putting, so that, again, you want to give them a sense that you're not pulling numbers out of thin air, that you've made an estimation of what a hotel night's going to cost times how many nights times how many people, and that's what you use to calculate. Again, you won't know the hotel necessarily, so this isn't meant to be exact, but it shouldn't be a guess where you think 10,000 should cover this trip. They're going to want to see that you've at least made some calculations over the different types of expenses you're going to incur on that trip. And then particularly those that are tied to a federal rate, like mileage, that you once you guess at the mileage, you have a very specific rate that you would multiply that by.
Yeah, and it makes it really easy to explain why you're charging that much for mileage if you're just using someone's standard rate, and why you estimated that for a hotel, because that's what the government estimates hotel for, and it makes it easy for that. I feel like I mentioned per diem, but didn't talk a lot about exactly what that is. So just to be sure, per diem is like the reimbursement that you give to your employees for meals and other expenses, incidental expenses when they travel overnight. And the government GSA page also sets suggested rates and policies for that you can use to estimate as well. Some organizations just use that, employees don't have to keep their food receipts or anything like that. They just get a set rate. Some organizations want employees to keep their receipts to get reimbursed for exactly what they spend. I think that's probably completely up to you, but you want to make sure that you're clear in your narrative about how you're handling that and how those things are estimated. All right, so supplies and equipment, these can be kind of close together. They're similar things, right? Things you buy to use, right? Supplies are typically consumed quickly. They usually cost less than $5,000. It's kind of intuitive of what kinds of things would be called supplies, things like paper, office supplies, marketing materials, things like that. Equipment, again, usually has a longer life of at least 2 years and costs more than $5,000. So here I have just done an example of supplies. In your budget, it looks different. It's just in different line. It looks about the same, supplies versus equipment. It's just listed in different lines. Here I've included that we may need some copy paper and some interpretive signage and an estimate for how much those cost per unit and how many of those I need. And then in my narrative, I say not only that I'm buying copy paper, but what I'm going to use it for. So copy paper to print informational materials in my office, how much paper I'm going to have and how much I think that is. For these kinds of estimates, there's no special magic. You just either are used to buying paper and you know, oh, it costs about $50, or you go to Staples and see how much it costs. Interpretive signage here, why we're doing it. We're having them printed professionally, and we think that this is how much they're going to cost. Anything on that piece, Eddie?
No, only that this was an area where folks would miscode because of either the type of, some things we were seeing as equipment, if it's a certain level of money amount. Again, it's better to have it listed somewhere and it corresponds to your narrative or to your proposal. And then we'd worry about putting it in the right place once we got to the award phase.
Great. Hey, contractual. So these are services that are going to be provided by someone outside of your organization that you're going to have a contract with. Typically, it's somebody who is a market-based firm. Sometimes you'll do a procurement process for that, depending on the funding regulations. It still has to be managed. These people still have to be managed. It does not mean that it's necessarily an easier route than managing employees. In fact, sometimes I find it to be more complex, but it is a good option for when you need some specialized expertise or technical services, and for a very discrete, like small part of your project. So it doesn't make sense to have that expertise on your staff all the time. And it may make sense in other instances as well. I think I'm seeing stuff in the chat about organizations that are primarily run by volunteers, but may need to contract out for some work. That would be another place where you would maybe opt to do that instead of having staff. But that's sort of all under there. And it sounds like this is where there maybe needs to be some clarity from what Eddie's seeing on his things. But a typical way of including your contractual, they tend to bill by the hour, right? So this is your contractor's hourly rate of $250. I said they were going to design my interpretive signs for me. I thought it was going to take about 20 hours for them to do that. That's probably really low. And it just, in my narrative, I say we're going to contract with a professional designer to create these signs, and that the market rate for these services are $250 an hour, and that I expect it to take about 20 hours. So I noted there that the estimated market rate was that because I was sort of writing hypothetically from a perspective and expectation that I had not already found my contractor before. I'll let Eddie jump in if there's any nuance. I know in the grants that I tend to help people with, there is some nuance about when and how you access and get your contractor and whether you know about them already in your proposal stage. But if you don't, you want to make sure that you're letting the reviewer know that you're budgeting at a rate that you've looked into, that you're not just guessing that it would cost $250, that is roughly what you think the market will bear.
Thanks, Carrie. Yeah, to emphasize some points here, there's a couple of things I wanted to mention. First, if for a lot of projects that we see, there's some construction related component to it where they are contracting with some firm to build something or create something. That shows up in the construction line item. A lot of folks might tend to break it apart and put it in supplies and equipment, but if it's an expense that a contracted firm is going to be incurring, you wrap all of that up into one line item under contracts, and then in your budget narrative, you explain, if you're going to have 4 contracts, you would detail what the 4 contracts are that make up the total for that contract line item. And I mention it that way because if you are doing the construction, you have a whole other budget form to fill out called SF424C, and we're not going through that on this webinar. But there's a whole other form that details just construction related expenses because there's a lot of other rules related to construction. Your contractor will have to abide by those rules, but they would know what those rules are. You just need to determine whether it's you doing the work or a contractor doing the work, and that determines where on the budget you put it on. The other thing to highlight is the main thing about the procurement rules to highlight is these contracts have to be competitively bid. We did get a lot of folks asking us in the last round that they said, hey, we already have a contractor we've been working with this whole time. They've been with us for the last 10 years. Can we use them? There are peculiarities about what you would need to show that they were competitively selected initially in order for them to continue to use them. But otherwise, you will have to compete your contracts new to comply with this federal funds. And a contractor you've used in the past would have to compete with other folks as well. I believe 3 is the minimum that you would have to show. You don't need to have done that for the proposal. You just need to know that you shouldn't be listing a very specific contractor with the expectation that that's who you're going to get to use in this. I will give a little caveat here, though, that there's also, from our perspective, a difference between a contractor and a program partner. If you're partnering with another organization and say your organization is taking the lead on all the planning and stakeholder town hall meetings, and then someone else is going to do programming and project delivery, but you all have equal roles in developing this project, then both your organization's personnel would be listed in the personnel. Both of the organization's fringe would be listed within different sections for each organization. That is different than you contracting with a partner organization to deliver the programming. On the contracting line, you'd have to compete for them. If they're a program partner, you can bring them in as part of your project design as an equal member of your project design and delivery. And then it's like everything that you're putting for the rest of the budget is representing 2 organizations in that, but only one organization is going to be the applying organization. I know it's a little confusing, and unfortunately, a lot of these, we won't know the specifics until we see your numbers, until we see what your case actually is. But there is a difference between a program partner and a contractor. We will be offering office hours throughout the rest of this month for our grant. So if you want to get into some of this, there'll be opportunities for you to explore your specific situations. Thanks.
All right. That takes us into construction. I think Eddie talked a little bit about the difference for how they think about construction and how if your folks are doing it versus hiring someone to do it. For our example purposes today, I assumed that I didn't have anybody on staff that would be able to install those interpretive signs, and so I would have to have someone do that for me, and that they would charge approximately $125 for each installation, and that I needed 5 of those. And so I just have that unit cost here, and then just a very simple description that signage is going to be constructed and installed at that cost.
Thanks, Carrie. Yes, we do. Construction is something that our grants do support. And if you list something in the construction line item, there's a separate SF424C that then breaks out in this example, it would break out the 625. It's only one line the way she's shown the example. But, if you're doing building a visitor center, well, our funding isn't that at that size, building an interpretive display. The reason I'm highlighting this as something specific to think about is that it's not just like with Carrie's example, installation of the signage. There would be costs associated with making sure that that site is able to be to have a sign installed. So when you are listing a construction line, one of the things that we're going to be looking at is if you're doing the work, is have you put in costs for any risk assessments, any permitting, any of the site prep that needs to be done before any work can be done. Because these are federal funds, the minute shovel hits the ground, you're talking archaeology laws and you're talking historic preservation laws. So a whole bunch of other stuff comes into play. It's not to say that we wouldn't consider it and that it shouldn't be part of what you're thinking about, but just be mindful that the costs to build are not the full cost, may not be the full cost. So if you're already at our max 150,000 and you got the award, we would be coming back to you to say, hey, you didn't have permitting costs in your budget. How are you going to cover those? And so some of those things either need to be incorporated in the budget, or you're going to have to understand that those costs would come out of your organization's budget if you accepted the award.
All right. So our next to last category, or in our last direct cost category, is other. This is anything that doesn't quite fit in the standard categories or those that are provided by the funder. An example that I run into a lot are event expenses. You do need to explain these even further because they are listed as other. And so you just want to make sure that you're clarifying exactly what those expenses are. Some funders like to call things differently. For example, I think some of the things that Eddie's explaining are about how they treat construction and how they treat partners and contractual may be unique to this program. And so you just want to make sure that you're really aware of how the funder you're applying to in any case is treating and thinking about different things. And so my example was tent rentals for an event. Eddie would have called this contractual, but I have here that we're going to need 4 tents. They're going to cost $250 for the day, and that it's part of our planned kickoff event to ensure that there's space for our information to be handed out, to provide shade for participants. And then again, I have that estimated cost there. I don't know if there's other things that are typically seen in the other category for this program, Eddie.
Yeah, a lot of stuff, it doesn't come in the other category, but it ends up in the other category. So after everybody submits their proposals, if you get selected, you go through a budget review process where somebody in our regional office does a deep dive into your numbers and comes up with all kinds of questions. In that review, a lot of times they will adjust the line items to be more reflective of what the actual definition is. So, but none of that would kick you out, between other and the other categories. As long as it's a line item somewhere, it's better to have it in the budget somewhere.
Great. All right. So that clears, sorry, my mouse has a mind of its own. All right, so that takes us through all of the direct expenses. And then finally, you'll get to your indirect. This is sometimes known as overhead, or at very large institutions, facilities and administration, or F&A. It's generally a standard rate that accounts for the cost of your organization that aren't easily just attributed to your specific program. So you've got to keep your lights on, you've got to pay the rent, you've got to pay the mortgage, you have to keep upkeep your facility, and you have to account for that somehow. And so many grants have limits on how much you can attribute to their grant. Often for a typical nonprofit, it's around 20 to 30%. For large universities, they're notoriously over 50% to do research. And again, funders often will limit what they're willing to pay. One of the things that you might hear or see is NICRA, or the Negotiated Indirect Cost Rate Agreement. You'll never hear it called that, only NICRA. This is a document that is published that shows what a specific organization has negotiated as their indirect cost rate with the federal government. And so that's what they use across all applications and programs. This allows your grant officer to quickly figure out what your indirect costs are for any of that, and often streamlines the entire process. Typically, NICRA is something that you see from very large organizations that are applying for a lot of federal grants. And often when you're reading a grant proposal or a NOFO, you'll see that the indirect rate is listed as NICRA, or sometimes a set amount, such as 10%, if you don't have a NICRA in place. So this just comes through as a percentage of your direct costs. So you calculate your total direct costs for every other line item through this point, and then you apply that 10% rate to those direct costs. And similar to Fringe, it's nice to have a standard description ready to go for all of your grants about what this indirect costs represents, what kinds of things are in there, and what rate you've charged. And so here we've charged the de minimis rate of 10%. 10% is a pretty typical cap on a lot of grants, especially federal grants. And so that's why I used it as an example here. And I'm not sure what the rates are for this one, Eddie.
Yes, ours is 10%, as Carrie stated. That means that unless you have a negotiated rate that is different than 10%, you can only use 10%. In some cases, projects they wanted the full amount. Our grants for this round are $25,000 to $150,000. So we're looking for proposals within that range. And there were a number of projects that came in right at $150,000, and they weren't able to add an indirect line because it would have put them over the max amount for the award. So and I do want to backtrack that the indirect is why I wanted to do this workshop, because the questions I was getting about this made me realize that we have folks applying that they're not thinking about the money that they can access through these proposals. And what I mean by that is that if you've got a $100,000 project and we allow for 10% indirect, that means that we are providing up to 10% of your total cost to just go to you to pay the lights, to pay the facility costs, the janitorial services, the water bill. That 10% is so that you can just exist as an organization, and you should be able to apply it to those kinds of costs. But we had a couple of organizations that were applying. One of them asked me, well, what if we don't want to put in the indirect? They were looking at about a $60,000 proposal, and I really couldn't get to why they wouldn't. And I was getting a sense that they didn't want to feel greedy, that they felt that, well, if they don't ask for the indirect, then they're showing that they're more bootstrappy. But in reality, it's just showing them that they haven't really done budgets before, and that they're more of a fledgling organization. So, just be mindful that this is something available to you. As long as it doesn't surpass the $150,000 amount, you are able to put in 10% as an indirect. It's a line that goes at the very bottom of your budget where you total up all your costs. Now, one thing I will say, though, is certain costs are not allowed to be calculated as part of the indirect. If you have a 100% construction project and no personnel, then you wouldn't be able to charge indirects on just the construction costs. Again, we had one example where that part of the budget just got removed and their award was reduced. It wouldn't kick you out if you listed it, because the merit reviewers aren't going to necessarily be looking at that. But when it goes to budget review in the award process, that's something that might get called out. So, just be clear on, we're making the 10% available to you. If you have a NICRA, if you have a negotiated rate that's different than 10%, you would use that and supply the letter, the agreement letter for the other rate as part of this. But otherwise, as long as you're not coming up on that $150,000 cap, this money is money to support you.
Yes, and I would just add, as someone who writes grants for the survival of my organization and helps other people write grants, if a funder is willing to pay indirect, then you should ask for indirect, because not everyone is willing to pay it, and it is very important.
Well, and I'll put another caution that where some folks think that they can get around or try to address this without thinking about the indirect is they'll start putting staff members at a certain percentage that doesn't really make sense to the grant because they're trying to use the grant to support more of as many of the staff members as possible as part of underwriting, the costs of the organization. That is not seen in a positive way. That's kind of seen as padding the budget. So you want to be realistic with all your costs and then, add in this 10% at the bottom.
All right. So then that is the budget for a proposal that you're writing to an organization. Sometimes you may be asked for match funding. Match is, or cost share is the cash value of anything that you're offering to cover the costs of, or your partners are offering to cover the costs of to help fund a larger project. As I said, it's sometimes called cost share. It might be that you, at the time of writing a proposal, you have that match or cost share already committed. You might be anticipating it. So you've submitted a proposal, but you haven't yet heard, but you feel really good about your chances. Or it may be that you're planning to write another grant to ask for that additional cost share. Cost share and match can be either cash, it can be another proposal, it can be another donation, or it can be in kind. In-kind services are usually provided for free or at a reduced rate to your organization. These are things like volunteer time, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Sometimes you may have a professional who is able to, in your community, who cares about your project, who's able to give you their services, but they can't quite give them to you for free, but they can give them to you at below market rate. And so that donation of their time at a discounted rate, that difference can be considered in kind. It may be that the county commission is letting you use their building for meeting space at no charge, when typically they would charge $150. And so that's an in-kind cost share or proposal. Sometimes this can help to boost the strength of your proposal, especially if the NOFO or the request for proposals is written in a way that says they're not requiring it, but they would like to see it. But it is a commitment. So if you say you're going to do it, they are going to expect you to do it. So it is not a good idea to say, we are going to get all this cost share and hope so, and then not get it. You should really only include things that you feel very strongly that is already committed, or that you feel truly, sincerely, strongly that you may get. Now, I tell you all of that about budgeting in general, but that's not required for this grant at all. There's no match or cost share required. Often, when that's the case, especially federal agencies, in my experience, if they don't expect cost share, they don't want you to put it in there, even as a sort of, hopefully this will help me. But it is good to sort of know and see how that might work. And it's also important to remember, I didn't put this on the slides, but especially for federal grants, there may be regulations or restrictions on what you can count as match. So typically federal money can't match or cost share federal money. So if you have one federal grant, you can't use that as a cost share or match on another federal grant, because the agencies consider that it's all the same money from the same pot. Although there are some nuance to that, but generally as a rule, that's good to know. So Eddie, do you have something else?
Nope, just wanted to remind everybody, no match. So yeah, we're very happy that this grant opportunity does not require a match. So whatever money you need is the money that you are requesting.
That's great. Awesome. So that is the budget. Eddie also asked me to talk through an SF424A. So this is the federal form. Eddie's mentioned a couple of times for construction that there's a 424C. SF stands for standard form, 424 is its number, and A is the number of the one that is non-construction. 424C is the construction version. There is a B, and I'll be honest with you, I don't remember what it's for, because typically you see an A or a C. So my number one recommendation to you when it comes to doing your 424A is to complete your budget totally, make sure it's final, you don't have any changes to it. And once all of those are confirmed, then put all of your information into your 424A, simply because you don't want to have to change all the documents at once. I have been there. So making sure that everything is final before you put all those numbers into that 424A will just save you from having to redo your work if you have to change your math later. So what I've done here is just taken all of the pages of the 424A and just put some notes here to talk through what goes in each section. Like many things in the federal government, every agency has some nuance to what they prefer. And so Eddie, I invite you to jump in if there's anything that you guys recommend or prefer that might be different. So in this first line, in that first box, you're putting the name of the program. And then in the next column is the catalog of federal domestic assistance number. This is found in your NOFO, in the notice of funding opportunity. From federal agencies, they always have this CDFA number listed. It may not have it spelled out like that. It may say CDFA, but that's the number that you want to put there. You're writing grants for new budgets. So you're going to skip over to the new budget section and enter the amount of funding that you're requesting in that federal box. And if you are using some cost share or match, you would put it in that non-federal box. That wouldn't be the case in this instance. Some agencies want you to divide on these lines differently, but traditionally, you're putting your whole program in that first line. Eddie, what is that match what you guys are doing? Do they put their whole total in just that line one?
Yes, sorry, I was typing something in the chat. They can, okay, so this is a preference. You can do it the other way, but there's a preference to just looking at your proposal as one project. You could, if your project say involved a community engagement project and a school participation project, you could say part one is community engagement, part two is the school piece, and break it apart that way. But it's a lot easier on everybody if you just treat your project as one project that you're separating out into the funds that you're requesting from us. Now, even though we don't require a match, a lot of folks did want to show when their project was part of a larger project. There's some good and some bads. In one case, the larger project provided the rationale for why we would even fund the smaller project. So that project had to provide the larger budget for additional context. In another example, it was hard to see what our part would be in the larger budget. So we had them rewrite the budget and just give us the numbers that were related to ours. It really depends on how easily can you differentiate what you're requesting from us versus what the larger project looks like. And that would be in the federal versus non-federal. And actually, it's really more federal and then not, or a grant and non-grant. Well, I guess it is federal and non-federal. Because a lot of the projects, it's the piece that you're asking from us, and then the piece that you already have from other sources. But I would recommend one program in one project.
All right, so next we have the more detailed sheet. Many of these yellow boxes will pull into other parts of it later. And so in this instance, what you put in this 1, 2, 3, 4 will automatically populate on the next page, 1, 2, 3, 4. And so then you're going to put the more detailed information in the columns. You'll see that all of those budget categories match the ones that we've been walking through this afternoon, and you're just going to put your totals for each line in this budget table. So if under a certain line, like if under that personnel line, we had a director and we had a volunteer coordinator, we're not separating that anymore in this form. We're just going to say this is our total for personnel. And so I've pulled, you can see this next to it. So you would just grab that 29,000 from personnel and put it into that line, grab your fringe total and pull it over there. And just type it in there. The yellow boxes are the ones that you can and should edit. The white boxes typically in the form will auto calculate or pull from somewhere else. And so it's going to do those totals for you. Always a good idea to double check that all the totals match to make sure you don't have a typo somewhere, to make sure that your Excel sheet didn't have a formula error, just to make sure that everything's matching appropriately from that. And then on the next piece, section C, the non-federal resources, this is where it wants to hear about. So this section is primarily going to be pulling from what you're asking for right now. And then in this section C is asking about your non-federal resources. So if you have no cost share, then all of those are going to be 0. If you do, then you would list 8, 9, 10, 11 would be the different sources of that cost share match. whether it's coming from you as the applicant, whether it's state money, or another source like a foundation, it's going to go in the appropriate column there. And again, those totals are going to auto calculate. Eddie, did you want me to keep going? Did you have something?
Yeah, can you go to the previous one?
Mhm.
Without the little additional there. So the reason we were saying just use call it one project is if you have multiples, then you have to fill out each of these columns and then tabulate them at the end. Versus if you just treat it all as one, you're just going to be filling out column one in this one. So it's just easier if you go in thinking about your project as one project for this. And the other thing is these forms are all online. When you click on apply now, you will get walked through it. I put a link to the checklist. We have a checklist that tells you in this box, put in this number, in this box, put in this phrase. And it was frustrating to see these forms being either incomplete or with some of the information that we had detailed put in the wrong boxes. So definitely follow the checklist because it makes the reviewer's job easier when they see all the things in the right places. But this is an online form that you can download them so you see what you'll have to prepare. But you'll be filling this out in the application.
I love an agency that tells you exactly what they want on their forms. All right. Okay, so we did section C. Section D is where you're guessing your cash needs. You're estimating how much of your funds you expect to draw down in each quarter of your first year. So you're going to do that math. And put that in there. It will total in that first year column. Again, you want to do that for federal and your non-federal if that's appropriate. And then if you have a longer than 1 year period of performance, I think this grant can be potentially 2 years, then you would want to put in your projected funding needs for the second year as well.
Yes, our grants are you have up to 2 years in your application to list a 2-year timeline for what you would hope to complete, but it doesn't have to be 2 years.
And then
incorrect forecast. There's a question penalizing for, we would not know that you're doing incorrect forecasting because it's forecasting. So none of this commits you. It's really more, have you thought it through is what the reviewers are going to look at. Have you anticipated when and what how much funds you're going to need.
And then you're going to put those direct and indirect charges in again at the bottom. Remarks, I've never put anything in the remarks. I think unless you have something that you need to say, you don't put that there. And that's the end of your 424A.
So just to close this out, there is a link in the slides that everybody's going to get to our landing page. We put a lot of resources in there. The checklist that I put a link to is noted, as well as a link to the actual application. So please do not start on the application without looking through the FAQ, the frequently asked questions. We've got about 14 pages of frequently asked questions. All kinds of things have been answered. Please review that. Please review the checklist. And then, just follow the format that we've asked for. We asked for goals and objectives. We asked for your project design. Make sure that those things are answered in what you're providing us. Next slide. And then if any questions come up, I've got some my contact information here, and we'll send out the office hour schedule. That'll be a link where you can just drop in as you need, ask a question, and then leave if you want. So we'll get that schedule out to everybody.